Story number 1. Ghost in the Snow, a Wyoming winter tale. I still wake up in the dead of night. The memory of that frigid winter evening in the secluded forests of Wyoming etched into my mind like the intricate patterns of frost that once adorned our tent. My name is Michael Thompson, and the events that unfolded during our camping trip have left an indelible mark on my soul. A constant reminder of the thin veil between camaraderie and the unknown. It was the winter of 1987, a time when the world seemed to pause. Wrapped in a blanket of relentless snow, my two closest friends, Tom and Sarah, and I decided to embark on an adventure that would bond us for a lifetime. We had chosen a remote campsite deep within the Wyoming National Forest, far from the bustling trails and familiar paths, eager to immerse ourselves in nature's untouched beauty and the solitude that only winter could offer. The drive to the campsite was arduous, the snow piling high against the windows as we navigated the winding mountain roads. By the time we arrived, dusk had settled, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that struggled against the encroaching darkness. The forest loomed around us, its towering pines heavy with snow, standing as silent sentinels guarding secrets long forgotten. Setting up camp was a laborious task, each of us battling the biting cold to pitch our tents and gather firewood. The air was crisp, our breaths visible in the frigid night as we worked under the dim light of our lanterns. As night deepened, we huddled around the campfire, the warmth of the flames a stark contrast to the icy grip of winter outside. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the clearing, and the comforting crackle of the fire provided a sense of security in the vast, silent expanse. Around midnight, just as we were beginning to drift into a peaceful slumber, the tranquility was shattered by an unexpected sound. Soft, rhythmic footsteps crunching through the snow surrounding our campsite. First, we dismissed it as the natural sounds of the forest, perhaps an animal foraging for food or the wind shifting snow across the ground. But the footsteps were too deliberate, too patterned to be anything but human. Tom, always the skeptic, glanced nervously towards the darkness beyond the firelight. "Did you guys hear that?" he whispered, his voice tinged with unease. Sarah nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "Yeah, it sounded like someone walking around us." Despite the growing tension, we chose to remain inside our tents, the safety of our temporary shelter offering little protection from the eerie sounds outside. The footsteps continued, moving closer and then receding, creating a chilling rhythm that echoed through the silent night. The wind howled louder now, amplifying every sound, making it difficult to discern reality from our heightened fears. By midnight and 15 minutes, exhaustion had set in, and we decided to retire for the night, hoping that the footsteps would cease as we drifted into sleep. We crawled into our sleeping bags, the warmth of the fire still lingering in our bones. But the unease from earlier refused to dissipate. Just as I was beginning to relax, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the tent. My heart pounded in my chest as I exchanged startled glances with Tom and Sarah. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling, before anyone could respond. The tent flap was yanked open, a blast of freezing air rushing in. I instinctively pulled the flap back, peering out into the inky blackness. There was no one there, only the swirling snow and the dense shadows cast by the surrounding trees. But then, my eyes caught something in the snow, a set of large, human footprints leading away from our tent and vanishing into the darkness. "Someone's out there," Tom murmured, his voice shaky. "But where are they going?" Sarah stood up, her expression grim. "We need to leave. Now." Panic surged through me as we hurriedly packed up our gear, the sense of urgency growing with each passing moment. As we loaded the last of our belongings into the truck, the snowstorm intensified, the flakes dancing wildly in the frigid air. The footprints we had seen the night before were still there, now partially covered by fresh snow, but no longer leading anywhere obvious. It was as if the intruder had simply vanished into thin air. Determined to understand what had happened, I suggested, "Let's go back to the truck and try to track those prints." but Tom shook his head, his fear evident in his eyes. "No way, we need to get out of here." Reluctantly, we agreed. As we drove away from the campsite, the shadows of the trees seemed to close in around us, the eerie silence broken only by the crunching of our tires on the snow-covered road. The journey back was tense, the memory of those ghostly footprints lingering like a dark shadow over our minds. When we finally reached the nearest town, the warmth of the local diner was a welcome relief. Over hot coffee, we recounted the night's terrifying events to the stunned waitress, who listened with wide eyes and a furrowed brow. "You guys aren't the first to experience something like that," she said quietly. "This forest has a history of strange occurrences, especially during the winter months. They say it's haunted by the spirits of those who lost their way in the snow." Determined to find some answers, we decided to research the area, delving into old newspapers and local legends. We discovered that the forest we had ventured into was infamous for stories about a man named Daniel Harris, a mountaineer who had disappeared one winter night in 1953. Despite extensive searches, he was never found, and his disappearance became a local legend, with many believing his spirit still roams the snowy trails, forever searching for a way back home. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to the forest one final time the following year, hoping to put our fears to rest and perhaps find some form of closure. Equipped with better gear and a resolve to uncover the truth, we set out into the wilderness once more. The drive was easier this time, the weather more cooperative, but the sense of anticipation and fear was just as strong. Upon arriving at the same secluded campsite, we felt a strange sense of déjà vu. The snow-covered landscape was peaceful, the forest eerily silent, as if waiting for our return. We set up camp, the memories of the previous trip casting a long shadow over our actions. That night, we sat around the fire, sharing stories and trying to rationalize the haunting experience from the year before. Around midnight, just as we were about to retire for the night, the familiar sound of footsteps echoed through the clearing. Our hearts raced as we exchanged nervous glances, the chilling memory of last year's experience surfacing in our minds. The footsteps were soft but deliberate, moving closer with each passing second. "Tom, are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, though his face was pale. "Yeah, but it sounds just like last year." Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. We waited, breathless, as the tension in the air thickened. Then, without warning, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, a man in rugged outdoor gear, his face obscured by the brim of his hat and the shadows of the night. "Who are you?" Sarah called out, her voice trembling with fear and curiosity. The figure stood still, his presence both captivating and terrifying. He took a step forward, and in that moment, the temperature seemed to drop even further, the snowflakes swirling around him like an ethereal dance. His eyes, though hidden, held a sorrowful intensity that made my blood run cold. "Daniel Harris," he whispered, his voice echoing through the silent forest. "I'm lost." The words sent a chill down my spine, the realization dawning on me that this was the spirit of the missing mountaineer, forever trapped in the snow. We reached out, desperate to help him find peace. But before we could respond, the figure began to fade, his form dissolving into the snowy night like mist in the morning sun. A sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, the snowstorm intensifying as if in response to his departure. We stood there, breathless and shaken, the echoes of his sorrowful plea lingering in the air. It was then that we knew what we had to do, to honor his memory and help his restless spirit find peace. We spent the next few days gathering information and resources, determined to perform a ceremony that would help Daniel find his way. With the help of local historians and spiritual guides, we returned to the forest once more, setting up a circle of stones and lighting candles to guide his spirit home. Under the cover of darkness, we began the ceremony, our voices blending with the whispers of the wind and the crackling of the fire. As we chanted, the air grew colder, the shadows around us deepening as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the figure of Daniel Harris reappeared, his form clearer and more defined, his eyes now filled with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice no longer filled with despair. "You've given me a way home." With those final words, his spirit began to ascend, the oppressive cold lifting as warmth and light enveloped him. The snowstorm abated, the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness, casting a golden glow over the peaceful forest. As we watched his spirit fade into the light of a new day, a profound sense of fulfillment washed over us. We had not only faced our fears, but had also helped a lost soul find peace, bridging the gap between the living and the dead with compassion and understanding. Years have passed since that winter night, and the memory of our haunted camping trip remains a haunting yet comforting reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. I often find myself reflecting on the lessons we learned that night, the importance of honoring the past, respecting the spirits that linger, and the enduring power of friendship forged in the face of fear. But the legacy of Daniel Harris lives on, a testament to the mysteries that dwell within the silent snow-covered forests of Wyoming. His story serves as a chilling reminder that some spirits remain bound by their unresolved sorrows, forever searching for a way to find peace and return home. And so, I warn others, respect the wilderness you explore, honor the memories of those who have been lost, and understand that some encounters transcend our understanding. For in the heart of Wyoming, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward compassion and eternal peace. Story number 2. The mysterious knocking in the snow. I still wake up in the dead of night, the memory of that fateful winter evening in Alaska etched into my mind like the relentless frost that once blanketed our rented log cabin. My name is Emily Carter, and the events that unfolded during our snowboarding trip have left an indelible mark on my soul, a constant reminder of the thin veil between safety and the unknown. It was January 1987 when Mark and I decided to escape the chaos of our everyday lives for a weekend adventure in the Alaskan wilderness. We had been planning the trip for months, dreaming of pristine slopes, untouched snow, and the serene isolation that only the remote mountains could offer. Our destination was a secluded log cabin nestled deep within the vast expanse of the Denali National Park. Far from the bustling trails and tourist spots, the drive to the cabin was arduous, the roads treacherous with ice and snow. Mark navigated the winding mountain passes with practiced ease, while I kept my eyes fixed on the swirling white landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly before us. By the time we arrived, dusk had settled, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground and painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. Setting up camp was a laborious task. The biting cold made every movement a challenge, and our fingers grew numb as we worked to pitch the tents and gather firewood. The cabin stood alone amidst towering pines, its sturdy wooden frame promising shelter against the unforgiving winter. Inside, the warmth from the stone fireplace greeted us, offering a stark contrast to the icy wilderness outside. As night descended, we settled into our temporary home, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence of the forest was both comforting and eerie, broken only by the occasional crackle of the fire and the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. We shared stories and laughter, the bond between us strengthening under the star-studded sky. Around midnight, just as we were beginning to drift into a peaceful slumber, a strange sound pierced the tranquility, a gentle, rhythmic knocking coming from the front door. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears or perhaps an animal curious about our presence. But the knocking persisted, growing more insistent with each passing minute. Mark sat up, his eyes scanning the darkness outside. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice tinged with unease. I nodded, my heart racing. "Yeah, it sounded like someone knocking on the door." Despite the growing tension, we chose to remain inside our tents, the safety of our temporary shelter offering little protection from the eerie sounds outside. The knocking continued, moving from the front door to the windows, each tap echoing through the silent night like a haunting melody. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop further, the warmth from the fireplace fading into the background as a sense of dread settled over us. By 1 a.m., exhaustion had set in, but sleep eluded us. The persistent knocking had morphed into a frantic rhythm, almost pleading in nature. I lay awake, my mind racing with thoughts of who or what could be trying to communicate with us in the dead of night. Suddenly, the knocking ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on us from all sides. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, the tension in my body slowly beginning to dissipate. But just as I was about to close my eyes and surrender to sleep, a soft thud echoed from the front of the cabin. Mark grabbed a flashlight, his hands steady despite the fear evident in his eyes. "I'll check it out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated, fear gripping me. "Be careful," I urged, my heart pounding in my chest. He nodded and slowly approached the front door, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As he reached for the handle, the door swung open with a loud creak, revealing nothing but the swirling snow and the dense forest beyond. No one was there, no signs of an intruder, no footprints in the fresh snow. Mark stepped outside, scanning the area with the flashlight. "I don't see anyone," he said, returning to the tent with a sigh of relief. "It must have been an animal or the wind." I tried to convince myself that was true, but the unsettling feeling lingered, a constant reminder that something was amiss. As we settled back into our sleeping bags, the cabin seemed to grow colder, the shadows lengthening and stretching across the floorboards. The following morning, the storm had subsided, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that glittered in the weak winter sun. We unpacked our gear, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on our minds. Determined to put the fear behind us, we ventured out for a day of snowboarding, the slopes calling us with their promise of exhilaration and escape. But the memory of the mysterious knocking haunted us, turning our excitement into apprehension. As dusk approached, we returned to the cabin, eager to unwind and prepare for another peaceful night. However, the sense of unease was impossible to shake, the shadows in the cabin now seeming to watch us with silent intent. That night, as we sat by the fire once more, the temperature in the cabin plummeted, the frost creeping along the windows like icy fingers. The wind outside howled louder, creating an eerie symphony that seemed to synchronize with the distant sounds of the knocking. At 12:30 a.m., the knocking returned, this time louder and more desperate. It seemed to come from every direction, the sound echoing through the cabin like a chorus of unseen voices. Mark and I exchanged fearful glances, the weight of our isolation pressing down on us. "I don't think we should stay here," Mark said, his voice barely audible. Before I could respond, the knocking intensified, transforming into a frantic pounding that reverberated through the walls. The front door began to shake violently, the force of the knocks causing the entire cabin to tremble. I felt a surge of panic, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be causing this relentless assault. Gathering every ounce of courage, I stood up and approached the front door, my heart pounding in my ears. Mark joined me, the two of us standing side by side as we faced the source of our terror. With trembling hands, I reached out and yanked the door open, only to be met with an overwhelming gust of freezing wind and a blinding blizzard that engulfed us in seconds. When the storm subsided as quickly as it had arrived, we found ourselves standing alone outside the cabin, the front door swinging shut behind us with a final, resounding thud. The snow had settled once more, covering any trace of the night's chaos, leaving no evidence of the pounding we had just endured. Confused and terrified, we searched the surrounding area, but found nothing, no footprints, no signs of an intruder, nothing to explain the night's horrifying events. The wind continued to howl, a haunting reminder of the unseen forces that seemed to be at play. We hurriedly packed our gear, the fear of another night of torment driving us to leave Alaska immediately. As we drove away from the cabin, the snowstorm receded, the road ahead clear but our minds clouded with fear and unanswered questions. Years have passed since that winter night, but the memory of the mysterious knocking in the snow remains vivid in my mind. Mark and I never spoke of the incident again, choosing instead to bury the traumatic experience deep within ourselves. Yet, the whispers of that night continue to haunt us, a chilling reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. In the years that followed, we heard stories from locals about spirits wandering the Alaskan wilderness during the harsh winter months, searching for lost souls and seeking connection with the living. Some believed our cabin was built on sacred ground, a crossroads between the living and the dead, while others thought it was cursed by the restless spirits of those who had lost their way in the unforgiving snow. But no matter the explanations, we knew deep down that what we experienced was real, an encounter with the unknown that left us forever changed. The fear and uncertainty of that night taught us the importance of respecting the mysteries that lie hidden in nature, and the enduring power of the human spirit to confront the unimaginable. I often find myself gazing out at the snow-covered landscapes, the echoes of that winter night lingering in my mind. The mysterious knocking serves as a haunting reminder that some encounters transcend our understanding, bridging the gap between the seen and the unseen, the living and the departed. And so, I warn others, respect the wilderness you explore, honor the memories of those who have been lost, and understand that some encounters transcend our understanding. For in the heart of Alaska, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward compassion and eternal peace. Story number 3. The Stranger in the Snowy Forest. I still wake up in the dead of night. The memory of that harrowing winter night in Montana etched into my mind like the persistent frost that once coated my windshield. My name is Anna Thompson, and the events that unfolded during my solitary drive through the snowy mountains have left an indelible mark on my soul, a constant reminder of the thin veil between safety and the unknown. It was early December, and the roads leading through the Montana Rockies were treacherous, blanketed in a thick layer of snow that made even the simplest drives feel like an expedition. I had planned this trip meticulously, eager to visit my sister in a remote cabin nestled deep within the wilderness. The idea of reconnecting with family amidst the serene beauty of the mountains was the perfect escape from the chaos of my everyday life. The drive started smoothly, the sun casting a golden glow over the snow-covered peaks as I navigated the winding mountain roads. The landscape was breathtaking, each turn revealing a new vista of pristine beauty. However, as dusk approached, the weather took a turn for the worse. Heavy snowfall began to fall, the flakes swirling violently in the biting wind, reducing visibility to mere feet. The temperature plummeted, and the once welcoming forest now seemed ominous, its shadows stretching long and dark under the heavy clouds. By the time I reached the cabin, the storm had intensified, the wind howling through the trees like the cries of lost souls. The cabin stood alone amidst the vast expanse of white, its wooden exterior sturdy against the relentless assault of snow. I hurried inside, grateful for the warmth and shelter it provided. As I settled in, the storm raged on outside, the snow piling higher with each passing hour. Around midnight, the power flickered and then went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. I lit a candle, the small flame casting dancing shadows on the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere that seemed to mirror the turmoil outside. As I sat by the window, watching the relentless snowstorm, I heard a faint, rhythmic knocking coming from the front door. At first, I dismissed it as the wind or perhaps an animal seeking shelter. But the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. My heart raced as I strained to listen, the sound echoing through the silent cabin like a haunting melody. Probably just a tree branch, I muttered to myself, trying to quell the rising fear. But the knocking continued, now accompanied by a strange, low whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the cabin. "Help us!" The voice seemed to murmur, sending chills down my spine. Unable to shake the feeling of unease, I decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, I cautiously approached the front door, my hands trembling as I reached for the handle. The knocking ceased abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed in on me from all sides. I hesitated for a moment, the candlelight flickering as if in response to my indecision, before finally summoning the courage to open the door. The snowfall was relentless, the wind howling outside as I peered into the darkness. There was no one there, no sign of an intruder, no footprints in the fresh snow. Confused and unnerved, I closed the door and returned to the warmth of the cabin, trying to convince myself that it was all a figment of my imagination fueled by isolation and fear. But the strange occurrences didn't stop there. Hours later, as I was about to retire for the night, the knocking returned, this time more frantic and urgent. The whispering grew louder, the words clearer. "Don't leave us." My blood ran cold as I realized that this was no ordinary disturbance. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching me, their presence palpable in the cold, silent air of the cabin. Desperate for answers, I reached for my phone, only to find it dead, no signal. No battery left despite charging earlier. Panic surged through me as I realized I was completely cut off, trapped in the cabin with whatever presence was haunting me. I decided to call my sister, hoping she could offer some reassurance or perhaps send help. But the phone remained stubbornly silent. As the night dragged on, the knocking intensified, echoing through the cabin like the relentless beating of a drum. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the flickering candlelight and the warmth of the fire. But the fear gnawed at me, making it impossible to find peace. Suddenly, the candle extinguished, plunging me into darkness. The oppressive silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I spun around, the flashlight revealing nothing but shadows dancing on the walls. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper. The footsteps stopped, replaced by the soft, sorrowful whisper once more, "Stay with us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I backed away, my mind racing with thoughts of what or who could be tormenting me in this remote, snow-covered wilderness. Summoning every ounce of courage, I decided to confront the presence, to demand answers and put an end to the nightmarish ordeal. "Leave me alone," I declared, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I have nothing to give you, nothing you need." The air grew colder, the shadows deepening as if responding to my challenge. The footsteps resumed, now accompanied by a ghostly wail that echoed through the cabin, sending shivers down my spine. In that moment, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the room, its form barely distinguishable in the darkness. The figure reached out a hand, its presence both captivating and terrifying. "I can't leave," the voice whispered, more clearly now, tinged with sorrow and desperation. The figure began to fade, its form dissolving into the shadows as the oppressive cold lifted, replaced by the soft glow of dawn filtering through the windows. Exhausted and shaken, I sank to the floor, the remnants of fear slowly ebbing away as the first light of day broke through the storm. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a serene blanket of snow that sparkled in the morning sun. Determined to leave the haunting experience behind, I packed my belongings and prepared to leave the cabin, eager to return to the safety and warmth of civilization. As I loaded the last of my gear into the car, I took one final look around the cabin, the memories of the previous night lingering like a shadow over the pristine landscape. Driving away from the cabin, the road winding through the silent, snow-covered forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, a lingering presence that watched me from the depths of the wilderness. The journey back was tense, the fear and uncertainty of that night pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. When I finally reached the nearest town, the warmth of the local diner was a welcome relief. Over hot coffee, I recounted the night's terrifying events to the stunned waitress, who listened with wide eyes and a furrowed brow. "You're not the first to experience something like that," she said quietly. "This area has a history of strange occurrences, especially during the winter months. They say the spirits of those lost in the mountains still roam the forests, seeking connection with the living." Determined to find some closure, I decided to research the history of the area. Delving into old newspapers and local legends, I discovered that the cabin was situated near a site notorious for disappearances and tragic accidents, particularly during harsh winter storms. Stories spoke of restless spirits trapped in the snow, forever searching for a way back to the world of the living. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to the cabin one final time the following year, determined to lay the spirits to rest and put my fears to rest once and for all. With a sense of purpose and a heart full of compassion, I set up a small altar outside the cabin, placing candles, flowers, and tokens of remembrance to honor the lost souls that haunted the snowy wilderness. That night, as the snow began to fall once more, I stood by the altar, my voice steady as I recited prayers and words of peace. The air grew colder, the wind whispering through the trees like a chorus of unseen voices. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted, the oppressive presence of the past giving way to a serene stillness. A shadowy figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, its form more defined and peaceful than ever before. "Thank you," it whispered, its voice filled with gratitude and relief. "You have given us peace." With those final words, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the snowflakes as the first light of dawn broke through the darkness. The snowstorm abated, leaving behind a sense of calm and tranquility that enveloped the cabin and the surrounding forest. Driving away from the cabin once more, the memory of that night felt like a distant echo, the fear and uncertainty replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment and peace. The experience had taught me the importance of honoring the past, respecting the spirits that linger, and the enduring power of compassion in the face of the unknown. But the memory of that winter night remains with me, a haunting yet comforting reminder of the thin line between honoring the past and succumbing to fear. I often find myself reflecting on the lessons learned amidst the silent snow and the lingering shadows of Montana, understanding that some encounters transcend our understanding, bridging the gap between the living and the departed with compassion and respect. And so, I warn others, respect the wilderness you explore, honor the memories of those who have been lost, and understand that some encounters transcend our understanding. For in the heart of Montana, amidst the silent snow and lingering spirits, lies a darkness that can consume even the bravest of souls, but also a light that can guide us toward compassion and eternal peace.